We've gotten into the habit that the only emergency that counts is an immediate loss of income. There are lots of unexpected events that happen even for gainfully employed people. Money can solve some problems, but a lot of them need this multi-layered approach. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Julian. And today we're talking about a new, better, maybe more modern way of thinking about emergency funds.
Yes.
Yes. It is that time of the season, that time of the year, I should say. It's cold. I said brick yesterday for the first time all year. I was like, yo, what's brick? I had to explain what that meant to my son. I was like, son, this is called brick. It's cold. Cold. Like, you feel your skin hurting and getting dry, like just from stepping outside.
They used to come earlier in the year. Or like in February.
Yeah. It's all weird. Seasons are different, it's different now. Our son will have a different timeline in his mind of when things get cold. But all that to say, this is kind of connected to weather. I'm going to get to that. But there's a reason why we're talking about emergency funds. And I think part of it is what we've hinted at a few episodes ago, where it's just a good time to reflect and to revisit, not necessarily old, but I would say overlooked aspects of personal finance, but just giving people an opportunity to refresh the way that they are thinking about these things. Because we do have this tendency to, I don't want to say overlook again, but like just kind of ignore it. We move on. Like we have this craving for the next big thing.
We check the box.
We check the box. We don't
like an emergency fund is 3 to 6 months of living expenses.
Did that. Don't got to think about it anymore. I'm moving on to the next thing. And it's like, well, first of all, there are several people out there who are still trying to build or rebuild theirs. And so there's an opportunity to refresh that kind of thinking. But, for the people who maybe haven't thought about it for a while and maybe their life situation has changed, it's like, oh, wow, I'm actually not covered. I've been walking around, raw dogging life, only to find out that I'm not nearly as secure as I would like to think. And so I'll give you a couple of reasons for that, right? We started talking about weather, and we've been spending a good bit of time talking about climate change. And we've spoken about this with respect to real estate investment. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is how more frequent severe weather, especially if you're a homeowner or like a car owner, like those things deteriorate your products, your assets significantly quicker than they otherwise would have, right? They were not designed for those things. Think about the amount of people, I think it was last year right around this time, where people were like, whoa, what's going on? I was so excited about my Tesla. And now it's out here, and apparently it does not work very well when it's super cold outside.
Yeah, that battery will deteriorate.
Right. Maybe you have like an air conditioning unit, and
had that thing on blast
you've had
all
it
summer.
on blast all summer.
Tried to turn the heat on.
Maybe you thought you had 2-3 more years left in you, but you weren't factoring in that it was like a significantly hotter summer, and you recognize that your AC bill was higher, but you're not thinking about the long-term wear and tear on the actual gears or the compressor. Compressor is what it's called? The compressor. I know this because I had to pay. If you know, right? You've gotten that quote, and it's like, look, we can repair the compressor.
Yeah.
Or we can just go ahead and do the whole thing. Because the amount of time it's going to take for us to get to it, you might as well just buy it new, right?
Oh, yeah.
So all of that to say, whether we're talking about the home, the air conditioner, your car, it's a good time to revisit the realities that, like, sometimes things happen, and sometimes it's just a couple $100, but you'd be surprised. There's some things that are like 4-digit bills that pop up, and you have to get them checked on or fixed. Last thing I'll say is, again, it's tied to weather, but this is a little personal as I'm thinking about my family. I had to remember, like, it feels like so long ago with Hurricane Milton. I've got a lot of family down in Florida, and I've got my father, he was trying to figure out where he was going to go. I got my brother and his wife, and they were trying to figure out where they were going to go. And of course, I was concerned about their safety. But, the money nerd in me was also thinking about the money. I was like, wow, all right, so where are you going to go? You got to pack up and leave. There's gas in the car that you maybe didn't account for.
Oh, and it's more expensive.
There's a hotel, right, and they're gouging, right? Yeah. So it's significantly more expensive. You may or may not have cash on you. There may be power outage issues. Like imagine having to completely replace your groceries, everything that may be in the freezer, everything that you had cooked and saved up for like hundreds and hundreds of dollars that you otherwise would not have just thought. It just happened, right? So it's not just, oh, I get to leave my house for a couple of days and come back. He was out of power for like 5-6 days.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had to throw all that food away. And that would piss me off, you know? So all that to say, it's a good time to revisit emergency funds and to think about the frequency, but also the severity of emergencies, and then start thinking about how to actually use the emergency fund so you can get yourself back on track.
Yeah. I think we've gotten into the habit that the only emergency that counts is an immediate loss of income. And so that's where the cash is king, having 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up. That's where all of that stuff breaks down, because the reality is there are lots of unexpected events that happen even for gainfully employed people.
Yeah.
And so this idea that it should only be, a certain month's income times 3 or 6 or 9, whatever you're comfortable with, kind of breaks down. It doesn't account for any changes in your personal circumstances, or it assumes stability in housing.
Yep.
It doesn't account for crises, which money can solve some problems, but a lot of them need this multi-layered approach. You need to have plans and contingencies and protections and community, and all of that stuff constitutes what is a good emergency plan or fund.
Yeah.
I also think the issue with just having 3 to 6 months expenses and checking the box on like, oh, I'm emergency funded, is that it underprepares people for prolonged emergencies. Like it assumes that the emergency is
easily absorbable.
Even something as obvious as finding new work or finding new employment. People have learned that sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it takes a year and a half.
Yeah.
Even a medical emergency might not just be a matter of hospital bills. You also need caregiving. You also need home modifications, all kinds of things. I think it also creates this false sense of security, because when people hit that 3 to 6 month target, like we said, they check the box and they move on. And it just underestimates the fact that emergencies are unpredictable by nature. And creating that singular benchmark makes people feel like if they can't create it, then, they'll figure it out during the emergency, which, again, big assumption, assuming that you're the only person going through said emergency at the same time.
Yeah.
And secondly, it allows people to become complacent and not realize that, like, it's not just an emergency fund, it's also an emergency framework.
Yeah.
The money is a great start. It's a very important piece of the puzzle, but you also need to be thinking about every dimension of an emergency and not just the expenses part.
Yeah, I think I like that. The way I think about it is it's not so much just checking the box because you have your emergency fund funded. It's about having an emergency plan.
Correct.
How do you actually access and activate the money? Is it in one place? Is it in several places? And because of that overemphasis on just having it funded, and preferably having it in, let's say, a savings account or some type of savings vehicle or investing vehicle where it's actually earning interest for you. We tend to overemphasize the value of, let's say, the interest rate, right? The more money you put in there, typically the higher money or the higher the interest rate the bank will typically offer you for that amount of money. Or in the case of a CD, the longer amount of time you agree to having the funds set in that bank and you not touching it, the more of a reward in terms of interest that they will offer you. What we don't look at is that fine print, which is typically like buried somewhere in the, I forget what they call it. It's not a prospectus, but like basically when you open an account, they give you like, here's basically the terms and conditions. Here's how it operates. And even in there, it's like pretty difficult to find. But what we tend to overlook without question, and I've been there before, is what that process looks like. You think that you can just very quickly and easily make that transfer and access those funds. Now, in some cases, if you work for a big bank and you have your checking account and your savings account housed in the same financial institution, you can do that. But if you've been one of those chasers of the interest rate and you got that allure and it was like, oh man, I'm not going to do it over here. I'm smart and I'm savvy because I'm going to earn another $80 in interest this year by parking it over here and having it separate. There's a full process that you have to go through to get that money from one institution to a separate institution.
To in your hands.
Right? And in many cases, it's designed to, if you want to expedite that process, you got to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And it basically undoes any interest that you've earned for that particular year. And in some cases, erodes even the original value or the balance that you had. And so all of that to say, you really, really want to make sure if there's any one place that I recommend people start is not just looking at how much money they have, but what that actual plan looks like. What is the emergency fund liquidation plan? And I think the first place to start is to just make a list of all of the assets, all the accounts that you have, and maybe have like a little bullet point there around this is what they say, 48 hours, 24 hours, instant, making sure that you can say, I can pull, let's say 2,000 from here and immediately, 1,000 from here in 48 hours. And I'm telling you, you'll be surprised. There's some financial institutions where, let's say you have $10,000, there's a maximum daily limit.
Correct.
Right? Like that's why that amount is there. And so you might have $10,000 with that institution, but you're only allowed to withdraw $1,000 at a time. Mm-hmm. And you may or may not even be able to schedule future withdrawals. Mm-hmm. So you may have to say, well, I ultimately need $5,000. So I need to withdraw this amount of money today. Then I need to schedule another $1,000 withdrawal tomorrow, and so on and so on and so on. That could completely derail your ability to actually absorb or solve for the emergency that you're being faced with. And so it's really important, that you create some type of one pager where you're saying, this is how I would handle a $1,000 immediate emergency. This is how I would need to handle a $5,000 emergency based on the way that my money or my accounts or my funds are set up. And this is what I would need to do if I needed $10,000 and I was okay with stretching it out over, let's say, a week-long period or something like that. But it's not as simple as you think it is. And in some cases, it's not just a matter of emergency funds in terms of cash being in a savings account or a CD. Sometimes it's the need to sell an asset, like an investable asset, like stock in a brokerage account, or, a crypto folder that you may have. Like that's cool too, but you just want to make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to handle that emergency without completely derailing whatever your investment strategy may be. So if you've got to choose between, let's say, a stable coin and like an altcoin, make sure that you're clear on multiple layers of criteria around what you were trying to accomplish with that particular fund. Was it just play money? Did it serve some other kind of purpose? But which ones will you want to sell first, second, last? And, just making sure that you're stitching together, or at least having some level of familiarity around where those accounts are, how long it takes for you to access those funds, and what that order of operations might be. Because that can really determine whether or not it's a true emergency fund, or if it's just a collection of accounts that that you have.
Yes. And I think what you're getting into is this combination of liquidity, which is assets that are able to be liquidated into cash quickly, but also accessibility. And that's changed because I think people assume that they'll always have cell phone service or power or internet. And so a lot of this stuff is digital, and you don't need to assume that. When Helene came through Florida, credit card networks were disabled at the same time as electricity and internet outages. And the stores who managed to stay open were asking customers to use cash or a check because they couldn't process credit card or debit card transactions. Yeah. And for somebody like me who counts my debit cards and credit cards as part of our immediately accessible liquidity, it's like, what would I do? Do I have cash on hand? And I come from a family that believes in keeping large amounts of cash. To me, not tens of thousands of dollars in the shoebox.
Your dad probably does have a couple $100 bills hidden somewhere in the house.
Yes, it's stashed all around the house.
He's old school.
Old school.
That wouldn't surprise
me
for
situations like this, because if you need to pay somebody for some gas, he got it.
I tell you
he's that person.
What was it? A couple weeks ago, we had someone come to the house and do some quick work on the front of the house, and he asked me for a check. Mm-hmm. He was like, "Yeah, we only accept check." And I was like, "What do you mean?" I just pushed back. I was like, "What do you mean you only accept check?" And he was like, "Well, I mean, we could do credit cards, but we got to pay the processing fee." And I was like, "I'm fine with that, but I don't know what the checks are." A check.
And that is my point.
I gotta search for a piece of paper, and it makes me anxious. Yeah. Just handing over a piece of paper with my account numbers on it to some guy that I've only met once who's going to do some work. And I was like, come on, man.
We have been long proponents of cashless society, digital, everything. But at the same time, the nature of emergencies has changed. And you got to have some paper currency, something that people can take immediately on hand.
Yeah.
Now, we keep enough petty cash in the house for like, tips, school trips, a little wad of dollar bills. But based on recent events, I've wanted to say like, maybe we should keep a little more.
Well, we did it certainly, during the pandemic. It was like, hey, man, we got to go.
Yeah.
We got to get a couple
I remember
hundred.
having a hard time spending that money because nobody had change.
Yeah, we sat on it for a while. It was like, man, what are we going to do with all this?
Yeah, I think what has happened is overcorrection, is because during the pandemic, nobody had cash. Nobody had change. We got all this cash out just in case the apocalypse happened. And then we were like, dang, now what? Nobody can break a 50. Nobody can break 100.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a firebox in your house, that's a great Christmas gift. Like, I'm not going to encourage y'all to overspend, but they usually go on sale this time of year. And it's a great thing to have in your house to keep all of your documents, your cash, any written plans, any passwords. And then again, beyond the physical protections, make sure that all of those accounts that Julian just mentioned, all of the places in your liquidity plan, make sure they're actually linked to your checking account for quick transfer.
Yeah.
What you don't want to do is try to move the money and it's like, well, first we need to deposit a penny. Like, first we need to make sure that your bank can talk to mine. In these periods of wide outages or overwhelming customer service, that process is just going to take longer than necessary. And sometimes it requires, especially if you share the account with a spouse or with a parent, it requires an approval process. Somebody else got to go in and click the link. Go ahead and do all that stuff now. The ideal outcome is that your funds, your credit lines, whatever you include in your emergency fund are set up for immediate access, and you don't have to do any sort of like confirmation or form filling out, or you don't have to do any of that when you need the money.
I tell you what, so you may be hearing all this and saying, all right, like, this is why I just keep everything in one bank, right? Because like, I'm not trying to fool with all of that. I wish it were just that simple.
Yeah.
That can present some issues as well. I do think that it is important to have multiple layers, or just to take a multi-financial institution approach, because you just never know. And so you should, like, if nothing else, it gives you a different level. If nothing else, it gives you a wider understanding of what competitors may be offering, so that you're not so loyal that you're overlooking some features and benefits that you actually end up preferring. And now you find yourself in a situation saying, you know what, I actually think I want to house more of my primary accounts over here because I'm seeing progress there. I know, I'll take a quick little pivot here. I know there's a lot of talk from an investment account standpoint of Vanguard. I mean, it's been a long time where people are saying, you know what, as much as I love the history and the sense and understanding of ownership, the slow nature of trying to access funds, or
send me a check.
Yeah. Like the idea that you are so cost focused that you are now unable to meet the immediacy of the need that I have is a bit of a concern. And so a lot of people have been transferring the money from Vanguard out to other more modern, more digital friendly or digital savvy institutions, especially Fidelity. And so the same is true when it comes to your financial institutions and with respect to your checking account and your savings account. I will also say this before I move on to my next point. Don't assume that just because you got the app, I've been there, you're thinking, I got the app, I'm good, I can do everything from the app. You actually can't do everything from the app.
No,
I've never met an app where you could actually do everything that you can on desktop, right? There are certain things that you can only do on desktop. And so if you're thinking that because you have the app and you've already downloaded the app, that you're completely covered from an emergency standpoint, you're not. And so that should also be a part of your plan, is making sure that you've already established, to your point, online desktop account syncing access, what you're talking about, this whole sending one penny from one account to the other to verify, access and rights and all those things. You can't do that from your mobile app, if I'm not mistaken. You can only do that.
Sometimes you can.
Well, I've been in a situation where you've not been able to do that, only on desktop. Sometimes you can, certainly with like PayPal and stuff like that, right? So what is the risk with having it all in one house, one institution, one app, one family, if you will? If you manage your financial institutions, like a lot of Apple product users do their thing where they've got all the Apple products. Like, what if you are just all in on one financial institution? There is certainly some value and some convenience that comes with that, but there's also some risk. And so one of the things that I would remind you of, or several reminders, would be What happened to Silicon Valley Bank in 2023? There was a bank run. They had a very, very quick liquidation issue. I forget what triggered it, but basically a lot of people lost a ton of money and they were not able to access their funds. They had to, basically shut down and halt the ability to even access your accounts. And it upset a lot of people. Think back to even, I think it was Robinhood, who's had several of these issues over the last year. So if you're thinking, I can just very quickly access my Robinhood account, sell some coins, sell some stocks, or cash out of some things really quickly. Whenever things get really hot, if you think back to like the GameStop issue, I think for sure that was one example, but I think there were a couple others where if there's just a little bit too much activity, and quite frankly, they start losing out on money and their ability to service all of these transactions and all of these requests, they will just stop.
Absolutely.
Right? They will just stop it and seize your ability to have access, do one of them, what I call classic Enron disruption situations where it's like, let's just pause for a second so we can reassess what we want to do and make sure that we come out on top of all of these transactions. Even big banks, Bank of America had an outage earlier this year. They experienced a significant outage where customers were not able to access accounts. PayPal, if you're thinking, that's why I go all digital, all tech. I mean, these are all recent examples of financial institutions either having a run on the bank or experiencing some type of issue. And so if you're all in on any one institution, that just means that when things go bad, when things happen, not if, but when things happen, you are really going to be disrupted. You're not going to be able to manage day-to-day transactions, and you're certainly not going to be able to address a emergency as it comes. So you want to have a multi-layered, multi-pronged, whatever you want to call it, approach. You want to have a combination of cash on hand, whether it's in a shoebox or, in an envelope by the door or under your bed, whatever it is. You want to make sure you have a savings account and or some type of certificate of deposit. You may want to spread that out over several, right? You want to make sure you have access to lines of credit if you don't have that already. Some people like to do HELOCs and make sure that they have that money just ready to go so that they can access some cash and some quick capital, whatever it is, personal loans, just things that you have the ability to compile a small but also larger amount of money in a pinch. Like that's what a real effective emergency plan allows you to do versus just checking the box because you've hit your 3 to 6 month goal, which I think a lot of people do. And then they move on to wanting to invest and, all the sexy stuff. It's like, man, you mess around and end up having to sell or take, early 401k loan if you don't set yourself up. And it really just undoes, in many cases, like months or years of work. So this is why having an emergency fund and setting it up properly and planning out how to access and liquidate that cash is so important.
Yeah, I think, and whenever you rely on one institution, you're at the mercy of their policies. And while they give you great deals to continue to bank with them, we'll give you the best interest rate. You've been a long-term customer, Mr. Saunders. We'd love to be able to help you with this. You got to keep in mind the multiple layers of protection that are needed in an emergency. If you've already got that already, great. But if you don't, it's worth taking the offer from your bank to another bank to see if they'll match it, just to make sure that you at least have some optionality there. Because a resilient safety net isn't just about cash. It also includes insurance, like you said, access to lines of credit, and even community or governmental support, right? And so as a part of that, you want to make sure that you're also prepared for non-financial emergencies. Things like relocation, caregiving, consider all of the resources that indirectly support you. And it starts with being familiar with the insurance that you already have. A lot of people just use things like health insurance or auto insurance for the immediate need, which is repair or an appointment or just filing a claim. But you need to understand how much your policy in general can minimize all of the unexpected costs. So understanding your deductibles and copays, as well as which hospitals are in network so the ambulance can take you to the right one. That's been a thing, like assuming it's not life-threatening, right? The ambulance is going to take you to the closest one.
No, but that's important.
But I
remember I used to do that.
Don't drive me to Grady.
Back when I was in
Take
corporate.
me to Northside.
That's a part of the plan. It was a part of the plan is to understand your health insurance. And so that when you're in that situation, you know exactly what to tell people, where to take you, because that can be the big difference between
Listen,
whether or not you're covered and whether or not you've got a $50,000 health bill that could have been avoided. Which brings me even back down to like the information that's loaded on your cell phone, right? Like, who is your emergency contact? Does your emergency contact have any of this information in the event that you're incapacitated? Like, all of these things kind of bleed into the conversation about like estate planning as well. But it's just like classic emergency planning that I think oftentimes gets overlooked. It reminds me of the conversation we had with Lynette Kofani Cox when her last book came out, and we did an episode with her, which was really well received. And I believe I asked her, like, what's that one piece of advice? And she was the one that really reminded me that, like, no, the emergency fund, like, it's so important. Like, everybody wants to talk about all these, sexier investment opportunities and ways to think about that, or maybe even long-term planning and estate planning and wealth building. But we often realize that the inability to handle or tackle an emergency is oftentimes the issue that completely derails a wealth building or an investing opportunity
correct.
altogether. And so you want to not just make sure that you have access to money, but like it's multiple layers.
It
Like
is.
she called out and lists an entire, almost like a library or an appendix of resources and local organizations and programs and government programs that people should know about, because this is why they're there in the case of an emergency. Like, this is in part funded by your taxpayers' dollars, but we don't really include how these programs can support you in moments of need. And so you should familiarize yourself with that. Like, if you're in Florida, you don't want to wait until you're hit with a hurricane to figure out, like, all right, now what is FEMA again? Like, how does
Right.
that work? I would imagine, and that's a bit of an extreme case, I would imagine more of those people who are in the way and are frequently affected by hurricanes, I've probably had that experience. But again, going back to weather, again, it's often overlooked, or climate rather. These are things that are forcing people to realize that, hey, you should probably be familiar with these things as well. Are you close enough to the coast to where you are now frequently being affected by severe weather? Yeah, well, you might actually end up having to engage with these organizations a little bit more than you may have anticipated. And so I think all of those things are and should be a part of the emergency plan.
I agree. The ideal outcome is that your financial tools are complemented by insurance, community resources, and a clear emergency action plan.
Yeah.
It's not just how much money do you have. It's an understanding that you have a combination that ensures that no matter the scale of the emergency, you can endure it without unnecessary financial or emotional strain.
Yeah.
Things like insurance that cover your preventative care, making sure that you take advantage of all of those appointments, your checkups, your screenings. The moment you are eligible for your insurance to cover preventative care, you should absolutely see that as a part of your emergency plan, a multi-layered plan, the ability to catch things early, the ability to have warning signs. When you understand which urgent cares are in network and how far they are from you, that prevents you from going to an emergency room, right? You can at least triage locally and then make a decision about where you need to go from there.
Yep.
And even things like government programs, you mentioned FEMA, and even things like SNAP or food banks or community fridges in your neighborhood. Like, if you don't need to spend your precious emergency funds on groceries, because there are literally organizations in your neighborhood that make sure that people who are in duress are fed.
Yeah.
Then know what those are, right? This is about not having to think about it in the moment, because in the moment, you're just going to want to solve the issue, check the box, use your money. But if you understand all the places that you can go to hedge, to slow the burn of using your own funding, it's important to know that.
Yeah, I've likely been more politically and community connected in the last couple of years. And so I have a different viewpoint on community now more than I have in previous years. And you're absolutely right. There's so much more. I mean, just the PTA, like, they have access to so many organizations, both locally and nationally, where you start to really understand that, wow, like, it just reminds me that when I was working, which is why I'm belaboring this point, when I was working, like, it was such an afterthought. You did not have the time to think about those things. And now that I'm on the other side, I'm realizing that, wow, like, that in and of itself, I don't want to call it a failure of, like, kind of public programming,
But it is.
but they don't
That's
have
the loneliness
marketing.
epidemic.
They don't have a marketing and communications budget to make sure that everybody knows that the resources that they fund are readily available to them. And so people will most likely rely on podcasts like ours or any other people who actually decide to cover these kinds of topics. But all of that to say, they absolutely should be part of the plan. And I'll say this again, I feel like I've been saying this for 20 years. What you realize is that most of these organizations are so hungry to help people. Like they have more than they need. You know what I mean? And it's because people just don't know that these things are there. They don't know that they exist. And so I really do encourage you guys to just take some time to think about it.
So we've already asked two important questions. The first one is, can I get the money that I need when I need it? That's a question to ask yourself as you're thinking about how secure your safety net is. The second question to ask yourself when you think about your safety net is, do I have multiple layers of protection? And then the last question is, can I rebuild and adjust my safety net as my life changes? It's not something that you just set and forget one time. It's not something that you just hang your hat on 3 years later because you did it using a bonus or whatever. Emergencies don't end just when the bill is paid. It's natural to focus on just getting through the crisis, but people forget that rebuilding the safety net afterwards is a really important part of the plan. Without that, one emergency can leave you vulnerable to the next. And so just like you automate your investing, you automate your savings to build an emergency fund in the first place, automation is a great way to replenish it. And after emergency, you should really try to set up, when it makes sense, an automatic transfer to your savings or your emergency account to make sure that it's constantly replenishing itself. It's almost like the FEMA model of prepaying for the next emergency while an emergency is happening.
Yeah, the cost of an emergency grows or inflates in proportion to your lifestyle. And so as your life grows, you decide that you want to upgrade and go from the beater that you've been driving and treat yourself to having a nicer car. Well, I can assure you that the cost of an oil change, the cost of a repair, the cost of replacing a light on that vehicle is going to be significantly higher. And we know this, but I don't think people really, I think we understand it, but you don't actually know the cost of the repair. That's part of the challenge. Very similar with buying a home. Like, God bless the people. There's someone in our life who we know, and I would imagine, I've not spoken to him, but I know they just bought a new house and they are super excited. The house was built, and I'm sure they're over the moon excited. And they're probably thinking, oh my gosh, like it's a sigh of relief. Like I don't have to think about fixing anything because the last house, we lived in it for a while. I'm just imagining, right? I've been there before, literally. And you are not, let me just say this, anyone who's thinking that buying a new home is going to be the big problem solver and free them of any repairs or emergencies. It does not mean that because your house is new that you're not going to have to deal with any emergencies.
That's right.
It means that you will be the first to discover the emergencies or the issues. You'll be the first to correct any of those emergencies. And you better hope that they are qualified to fall under whatever warranty program you have. If you built it, you better hope that it's something that you caught and got some pictures of as you were doing your walkthrough, because they will try to speed walk you through that process.
Yes, they will.
But I'm just telling you.
Here's your water. Here's your lights.
Everything good? Everything good? Everybody happy? This is Dream Life. You guys are going to love it here. All right, let's go.
Listen.
Like they are quick to build, put some drywall up and not talk about the issue behind that wall. Or
know that you're not going to use that bathroom as much as you're going to use this bathroom.
Exactly.
Use every single inch of your new house.
You better use it
while that thing is under warranty. You better take a bath in every bathroom
downstairs.
Take a poop in every toilet.
I'm telling you, because otherwise you
turn on the heat. Turn on the air.
I'm telling you, do not assume. So all life happens fast, and to your point, like yes, you absolutely need to be adjusting proactively your emergency fund and plan as your life changes and or evolves. It's not just a matter of having children, and that being the thing that forces you to reevaluate what that plan is. It's a promotion, it's making quality of life changes or enhancements. Like all of those little things can have an impact on how you should be planning for emergencies. And it's also things that are just completely out of your control, like going through what we've gone through the last couple of years, which was a literal hyperinflationary market. And we're still kind of feeling the ramifications of that now. And so these are all things, all scenarios and situations that I think make the importance of having a plan, refreshing that plan, a really, really important thing. And so my hope is that as we're closing out the end of this year, this is a little bit of a project. I think that's time better spent than buying a bunch of things that you probably not going to use or even really want. Like, give yourself a little bit of homework to better set yourself up going into the new year.
Yes.
And I think it's something that will, pay dividend in the future.
Yes. Protect the things that you have.
Yeah.
And I want to end with just a little message for the people whose anxiety is up in the brain pushing buttons. That's an Inside Out reference. Like it's Inside Out 2, where anxiety is up there pushing buttons and you're worried about creating this perfect safety net. Like people are constantly chasing a perfect safety net. They're always thinking about the next thing, and it can make them anxious and overly cautious to the point where you're not enjoying the life that you have because you're always thinking or planning for the next emergency.
Yeah.
And I want to say that adjusting your safety net to fit your life isn't about worrying about every single what if. It's about knowing and making sure that you feel ready to protect the things that matter most to you. This is about protecting yourself, your neck, your family, the things that matter. And to be clear, your emergency fund doesn't have to be perfect in order to be effective. Sometimes it is just a matter of stopping the bleeding. So start small, focus on progress. Remember that even a little cushion is better than none. I know enough of us have seen Bear Grylls movies or shows and action movies to know that, like, yeah, if you don't have an emergency room available, like, cut that sleeve, tie it around.
Grab a branch. Let me show you what to do with these leaves.
Like, get resourceful. Stop the bleeding. And then remember that rebuilding your emergency fund isn't about punishment for the last one. Like, it's not, it shouldn't feel like this, like, dredge of a thing. It's a part of life. That's why the word exists. That's why all the advice exists. That's why all of the protections exist. Everybody experiences unexpected events in life.
Yeah.
And the recovery and the acknowledgement is a part of creating that peace of mind that allows you to enjoy life as it is, right? Yeah. So those are my final thoughts.
All right. Well, wrap us up.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. I don't have no emergency pun for leaving a review. I don't want to scare nobody. Like, it is urgent, but it ain't an emergency. That you let us know if you like what you heard. So leave us a 5-star review or drop a comment below to keep the conversation going. And we will see y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.